Hey, I'm Alex Rackle from Board Game Co., and today I'm ranking all of my CMON games. Or more specifically, all of the CMON games I've played in general, whether or not they're actually here in the collection. Now, I'll be going through all of this. I will have links and timestamps to everything down below. I will not have the games on camera for every single segment. Think of this more as a podcast than me showing you the games, but I'll be telling you where the games are, what my rating was, what the reasons for that rating was. But before we dive into all that, just some general notes. Number one, I'm going over the CMON games that were on crowdfunding, meaning CMON in general does distribution. They've done things like Sheriff of Nottingham and Gizmos and all these other games that I will not be covering. I think they've done Gizmos, but I will not be covering those today. I'm specifically focusing on the things that they've launched on Kickstarter and on GameFound, and I'm realizing now I might be missing a few that were also pre-orders and backer kit, like Metal Gear Solid is not on this list, not that I've played it. To that end, they have over 50 crowdfunding campaigns. I believe they're at around 55 or 60 now, and I'll be going over, I believe, 33 of those. The reason for that discrepancy is, first of all, I haven't played 12 of their games. And I'll be telling you shortly, I have a little list of notes I'll be going over. I'll be telling you shortly which games I haven't played, so in case you're wondering, these will be very specific. Here are the ones I haven't even played. I cannot give you an opinion on those games. And then separately, there's also games that are grouped, and I'll tell you which ones I'm considering a grouping. So for example, Zombicide Season 1, 2, and 3, I'm grouping as one singular title. In general, if a title is the same general concept, I'm going to group it as one thing before I go ahead to rate and review those games. And to that end, let's go ahead and go through all the various notes so that you know, well, everything that I know. Starting off with the fact that here are the games, the 12 games that I have not played from them, 13 if you count Metal Gear Solid, and possibly whatever else I missed. I forgot about their pre-orders and back kit. I forgot about that. Anyways, we have Zombicide 1, 2, and 3. Never tabled those games. I think I might have actually played the original Zombicide, but I don't remember for sure, so I'm just putting in the never played category. Sedition Wars. I owned it once, but I never actually played Sedition Wars. It's one of their first crowdfunding campaigns before they ever got big. We have Relic Knights. Never tabled that one. Again, one of the very early ones. We have Guilds of Cadwallon. I don't believe I've tabled that one. I may have. It's possible. I know I owned it at one point, but I don't believe I ever played it. Wrath of Kings, similarly, never tabled that one. The World of Smog on Her Majesty's Service. Not to be confused with the World of Smog Rise of Moloch, but the World of Smog on Her Majesty's Service. I think I actually played this one. I think I did, but I don't remember, so I'm not sure if I read the rulebook or not, or maybe I read the rulebook and then never tabled it. I remember owning it. I don't know if I ever played it, but I'm going to count it as not playing it, because if I can't remember playing it, that's good enough for me. The World of Smog on Her Majesty's Service, never played that one. A Song of Ice and Fire tabletop miniatures game. Never played that one. I have played the new Song of Ice and Fire one, the new Song of Ice and Fire Tactics, and they are similar, but I don't know how similar or different they are, and since I never played the original, I will not be counting that. We have Star Arcadia Quest. I played Arcadia Quest. I never played Star Arcadia Quest. We have Teen Titans. I never played that. I played the Scooby from that whole, animation collection, but I never played the Teen Titans games. Night of the Living Dead, a Zombicide game. Never played that one. Zombicide White Death. That's still new. Never played it. Never got my hands on prototype. Mordred. Never played that either. I believe Dice Tower did a playthrough, but I never had access to that one, so I did not play Mordred either. Those are the 12, and then Metal Gear Solid or whatnot, I did not play that. Those are the 12 or 13 games that I have never played from their titles. This is not counting, by the way, upcoming crowdfunding campaigns. So, for example, I'm not counting things that haven't yet launched. DC United, D-Genesis, they have the new Dune expansion, things like that. I'm not counting that they haven't even launched in any way, shape, or form. Not counting those at all. To that end, the things I'm counting as a group, just so you know, and these are obviously up for debate. So for example, some Zombicides I distinguish between them, versus all Marvel Uniteds I'm counting as one group. That comes down to my own personal interpretation as to whether they feel different or not. Even something like DC United, I don't know if I'm going to count DC United as separate from Marvel United, and I haven't played DC United yet, so I can't comment on that. But we have all Marvel United, bundles as a group. I'm counting that all as a single campaign, effectively, a single game rating. We have Cthulhu Death May Die. They have 2 campaigns for that one. Both I'm counting as a group. We have Xenoshyft, Onslaught, and Dreadmire. Bundling those both as a group, 2 separate campaigns. Same basic game, they're expandable. Arcadia Quest, Inferno, and Riders. That's 3 separate campaigns. I've played with a bunch of the contents from a variety of them, counting that all as one singular group. Zombicide Black Plague and Green Horde, bundling that as a group of 2 Zombicides together. Although I could make the distinction between them, I'm going to count them as a single group. Marvel Zombies and Deceased, again counting it as a group. They are effectively too similar in the gameplay mechanisms that while there might be things you like about one versus the other, for me, having played both, they rank the same in terms of where they are and how they feel. And then lastly, Rum Bones Season 1 and 2. Now this is actually an interesting one. Rum Bones Season 1 is actually a different game than Rum Bones Season 2. They improved upon Season 1 in Season 2. I have all of it. The problem is I only played the Season 1 rules once just to try it out, and then from there went directly, because I got it with Season 2 and I got all of the stuff. enough. And so I went directly to Season 2 effectively, so I don't think Season 1 is as good as Season 2 in the rules, but the components are all backwards compatible, they made changes. I am effectively counting as a group, with the caveat that if you're just looking at, if you just play the basic Season 1 of Rum Bones, it is a different and slightly worse experience than Season 2. And with those notes and caveats out of the way, more notes than caveats, let's go ahead and start ranking all the CMON games I've played. There are 33 groups or games that I'm going through today, of which I own 16 of them. So I own roughly half these games. Part of the reason I'm doing this video, by the way, I actually did this a long time ago. One of the first, companies rankings I've done is a ranking of CMON's games. I don't do this for a lot of companies because, frankly, there are fewer companies where I try to play all the games from that company. CMON is a publisher that I've been a fan of for a very long time. I like the games they put out. I think their games hold value on crowdfunding in general, and so for both in terms of giving you reasons to back as well as giving you reasons to play, they've worked for me. They clearly do not work for everyone. For every game they put out, there are people who roll their eyes at another Marvel United, another Zombicide, and there are people who don't like their tactics on crowdfunding. That's totally fair, but that's, for me personally, they have worked as a publisher. But just because they've worked as a publisher doesn't mean all their games have worked for me. In fact, slightly more than half have not. They have not stuck around, and even the ones they have, there's no guarantee which ones will or won't stick around, because to a certain extent, CMON's worst enemy is themselves. Meaning, effectively, when they put out a game, very often I'm looking at that game and thinking, not just whether I enjoyed it or not, but whether I enjoyed it enough to keep it or pick it over something else that they've put out that feels similar. Even the times I differentiate from the Zombicides, they're still a Zombicide game. Even when I differentiate between things like Massive Darkness or Dead Keep or God of War versus Cthulhu That May Die, there are sometimes similarities that make the games, again, competing against themselves for space in my collection. And with that, let's go ahead and start this off, starting off with Bloodborne the board game. This one I rank a 2 out of 5. And to be very clear, Bloodborne the board game is probably I think the rest of them that are lower down in my rankings are probably not as egregious in terms of the general perception, but Bloodborne is a game that didn't work for me. It may well work for you, it is generally well rated, it has generally been well received, but it wasn't the game experience that I enjoyed. And it's one that I do frequently think to myself, do I wish I could go back and try it again? Do I think I should give it another try? And I don't right now, but I want to a certain extent. There's so much time, so many games and not enough time. But Bloodborne for me was a game that the biggest complaint, and I've said this before, is that it felt too true to the video game, which I didn't like. I backed it hoping that the game would actually be different than the video game, that the tabletop implementation would not be the same as the video game, and to me the constant spawning of enemies that constantly felt like a drain to take out, and the way they came back, because something like Bloodborne versus Zombicide has constantly spawning enemies you constantly have to kill. They have that. But they're usually meant to be there just so you can level up, just so you can crush through them. They are an obstacle in your way that you feel good about defeating them, versus in Bloodborne, you will go through a challenging combat to take out a bunch of enemies, and then they respawn 2 lanes over as the whole fog kind of deals with you over there. It's one I do kind of want to try. On the surface, there are elements of the game that I should still appreciate, but the actual gameplay felt like it was very meticulous in terms of the card play, similar to the way it's structured in the video game, and that the enemies are constantly respawning, and so it felt like to a certain extent you were playing this game of when to fight or when to ignore, which again is similar to the video game. The thing that's weird for me is some of those mechanics do work well for me in other games. Again, constantly spawning enemies, many CMON titles haven't, and I don't have a problem with it at all. The idea of having to worry about when to fight, when to run away, I love that in Resident Evil and in Nemesis, so why not here? So on the surface, there are still things about Bloodborne that should work for me, but at the end of the day, I played it a few times, it didn't work for me at the time, I wonder if I should give it another shot, but for right now, it is actually my least favorite CMON title, which is almost unfair considering the ones that are coming up next. We have Masmorra, Dungeons of Arcadia. Gave that a 3 out of 5. Not a game that was for me, but it wasn't even bad. To me, and this is one where I played this so long ago, it's going to be hard to be detailed about the critiques, I just don't remember being overly impressed by it. I know that's not a really nuanced critique, but I played it like 5-6 years ago, something like that, and I don't remember much about it. I just remember thinking that I'd rather play Arcadia Quest. It kind of had a similar vibe, different, but similar vibes to a certain degree, and I'd rather just play something like Arcadia Quest as opposed to Masmorra. It just felt like a weaker version of the series. And again, I'm not being as detailed in my critique because it's been a long time. Coming at number 3 again, coming in with another 3 out of 5 is Xenoshyft Onslaught. The Xenoshyft system of games is a deck building game, so you're fighting off against a bunch of Xenos as they try to fight you as you build your deck to get stronger. It is a cooperative deck building survival game that is fine. it's totally fine. Nothing but the game was bad for me. I felt there were overwhelming odds. Frankly, I'd rather play something a little bit more thematic like Project Elite, which, to be very clear, very different game, similar theme, but very different actual games. But I'd rather play Project Elite any day of the week. For me, Xenoshyft Onslaught felt like a decent deck-building game in a world full of great deck-building games. Another 3 out of 5 is going to be Kaosball. I wonder if this should be ranked lower, I don't know, but I remember enjoying Kaosball enough when I first played it. Kaosball is one of CMON's earliest titles, one of CMON's earliest titles. I'm trying to go with the CMON pronunciation, but I still slip up here and there. Anyways, Kaosball is one of their earlier titles, and I thought it was a decent game. I don't remember much about it right now, but I remember enjoying the game, and even holding on to it for, I don't know, a few months, as I kind of wanted to keep playing it, but then realized as well that it just wasn't going to stack up compared to the other titles. Kaosball is a sports game. You're going to have teams, you're going to have various, kickers or whatnot. You're going to be trying to build your team and your agents and all that, and then try to deal with the field of sports and all that stuff, and getting goals, and again, if I don't remember some details of this is another one that was way back, way long time ago. But I remember thinking that it was good, but that it didn't really have staying power compared to other titles that have themes I prefer and gameplay I prefer. A Song of Ice and Fire Tactics. That's their more recent game. That's going to be another 3 out of 5 for me. A Song of Ice and Fire Tactics, this one was recently on GameFound. I thought it was a totally fine game. My problem with a game like this is that I don't mind the game even. I thought it was a decent game, but it's one that asks a lot of you. I find games that ask a lot of you, whether rules, whether campaign games, whether cost. I find games like that, they have to be that much better, and my desire to play them reflects in the rating. For me, A Song of Ice and Fire Tactics, if it stood on its own, would almost be a 3.5 out of 5. But the idea of what the game is trying to do and how it's trying to pull you in, it kind of asks so much from you, but then doesn't really deliver as much, at least not for me. For me, it was a decent gameplay experience. I had fun with it, I played it, I had a little skirmish back and forth, but the amount of team building or whatnot, I think if you're a fan of the world of Westeros, by all means, I think that's a game that might well lend itself to being a good tactical skirmish game. But to begin with, this type of game isn't my go-to to begin with. It's not my desired... I find skirmish games have to be almost more about the objective than killing each other. And even though the scenarios I played did have degrees of that present, it still felt like it was more about killing each other, while you try to be mindful of your stats and each opposing team's size. It's one that I don't think I'd ever appreciate nearly enough to be able to dive fully into the world. It's not a bad skirmish game, but I find skirmish games are not my go-to to begin with, and they kind of have to persevere past a certain amount of being really, really good at what they do for it to be a game I dive into. We have Scooby-Doo the board game, another 3 out of 5. Scooby-Doo the board game was a fun cooperative game. I actively enjoy this game. The only real problem with it is that there's just so many good games in the genre. Scooby-Doo is honestly, this is one I almost debated putting as a 3.5 out of 5. It is a good time. It's a fun time as you sit there and wander around the map, building traps, moving your characters from location to location, being mindful of the unique boss that you're fighting against. The theme, I'm not a Scooby-Doo fan to begin with, so I don't really care about that. The gameplay was fine. It was a good gameplay arc as far as gathering components, moving your, mystery machine around the board, and trying to avoid the boss while trying to build those traps. It scaled nicely in difficulty. It had an interesting mechanism as far as the turn order structure, and then had to handle it differently if you're playing it solo versus a cooperative or whatnot. But I thought it was a decent, good game. Great production value, but production value alone is not good enough to hold on to a game. Ultimately, it's a 3 out of 5. It was fun while it lasted, and I moved on from it. We have Arcadia Quest, coming in at a 3.5 out of 5. Now we're moving to the 3.5s. We're going to have a bunch of these before we get to the 4s. But Arcadia Quest was a game I've always wanted to like. I kept diving into Arcadia Quest again and again. And when I say again and again, I think 3 times. I think I went on 3 separate arcs of trying, not more to be clear, played it more than 3 times. But I think I played it, got rid of it, got it back, played it, got rid of it, got it back, played it, and then eventually gave up on it. I think Arcadia Quest is good. But this almost comes back to the fact what I said about when a game asks more of you. For me, Arcadia Quest as a one-shot, maybe it would be redeemable, I don't know. But as a campaign arc, we have to play 6 games, or I think Arcadia Quest is 4, but again, I never played Arcadia Quest. But as a campaign arc, we have to play 6 games. I didn't like it enough to ever force myself or my group to go through a series of 6 games of Arcadia Quest. There are games I like enough to do that. Arcadia Quest just wasn't one of them. I love the characters, I like the monsters, I like all that, but the core gameplay idea, it has one of the things I hate in board games. Hate is a strong word, but I don't like as a mechanic, which is the last hit mattering. The idea that you'll ping down these monsters and the person who gets that last blow in, because in Arcadia Quest, you have a bunch of heroes that are effectively fighting against these monsters. You can also fight against each other, but whoever gets the final blow on the monster gets more rewards, and I don't like the idea that I'm disincentivized from pinging the monsters during the game. I like to be rewarded for trying to hit people, not penalized if I don't do it exactly right. And you could argue there's strategic gameplay behind it. I'm sure there is. I just don't find it fun in terms of limiting myself to be mindful of who gets that last blow. But I like the rest of it. I like the upgrading. I like the characters. I like the growth. I like the in-between progression of trying to get your character and stats and all these things. And I don't think there were stats. I don't remember. There was definitely gear. Lots of gear. But I enjoyed the game, but never enough to power through 6 sessions. I think I may have done 6 sessions one time. I think I've done 3 sessions multiple times because I'd do 3 sessions, then pack it away and it wouldn't get tabled. Then I'd reset and try it again. It was a good game system, but not one that works for me. We have coming in at Zombicide 2nd Edition. Is another 3.5 out of 5. I played through a full campaign of Zombicide 2nd Edition. I enjoyed the game, but I enjoyed the game with the caveat that it was never a challenge. It was never remotely close to a challenge. At a certain point during our campaign playthrough, we had people trying to die, almost trying to die, to set themselves up, not like literally trying to die because you could die if you literally, but being aggressive and taking risks and putting themselves in bad situations, and they're still powering through hordes of zombies. Zombicide 2nd Edition to me felt like a walk in the park, an absolute cakewalk. It was way too easy. I've had complaints around Zombicide Invader, but Zombicide 2nd Edition makes the Zombicide Invader look punishingly hard by comparison, at least in my opinion. Everyone's experiences will differ, but a big thing for Zombicide for me is that it has to feel like a difficult, challenging experience. Some of them have given me that, others not so much. To me, when you're walking around trying to play the game and you're never really in any threat for your life, that's just not as much of a fun experience. I don't even mind whether I win or lose, but I want to feel the fear. And in Zombicide 2nd Edition specifically, I never felt that fear. I believe it's a fairly popular one for CMON. They printed a lot of different expansion packs and all those things for them. I'm happy for it. I'm sure it has a audience in terms of, again, I play Zombicide a lot, so maybe I need a higher level of difficulty to keep me engaged. But it's one that didn't work for me. But again, I played through an entire campaign because I still enjoyed it, but it wasn't a keeper. It was never a keeper for me. We have Trudvang Legends coming in another 3.5 out of 5. Trudvang Legends had a lot of things that I enjoyed, and it did feel different than other CMON titles. This is one where it felt like it was competing with other game systems in general. And there's still a part of me that has FOMO over the fact that I never dove into various... They had the base game finally shipped, but there's so much content for the game, there's so much crowdfunding content for the game that I still have second thoughts about, is it a game I should dive into? But the reality is I don't need to be sucked into more big box games. I have so many big box games asking for my time and attention. I don't need to try to fight to try to preserve them. If they work for me, they work for me. If they don't, they don't. And at a certain point, you have to move on from them. But Trudvang Legends had a decent gameplay loop. The biggest problem I had is the variety of things you were doing in the game felt incredibly minimal. It felt like as you played through the game, you were fighting the same monsters again and again and again. The story was good, but not great. The idea of the living world, very compelling. Would have loved to see that play out to fruition. At the end of the day, it's a game that I played it 6 or 7 times. I never finished the full arc of the first campaign. I played it 6 or 7 times, and at a certain point, I was like, you know what? I've seen enough, and at this point, it's starting to feel like a chore as opposed to rewarding and satisfying. There's elements that I enjoyed, for sure. The bag building was fun to a certain extent, but you just tap out on how fast you can progress versus how varied the enemies are. And so Trudvang Legends, I applaud CMON for doing something different, but for me, it felt like it's a game that could still use more polish. There are just other games that do that kind of gameplay loop better, in my opinion. Coming in at another 3.5 out of 5, we have Hate. Hate was an interesting one. Hate's Own I only played a few times because again, they had kind of the Arcadia Quest problem, which is, do I like you enough to power through multiple gameplay sessions of it? And in the case of Hate, I don't think I do. Because to me, I love Rum Bones. Spoiler for the fact that it's going to be coming up later on this list. And the times I would play Hate are probably the same times I would play Rum Bones. It's a 2-player head-to-head skirmish game, but I preferred Rum Bones. And so I'm not going to dive into a commitment of 6 games, even though I liked what Hate was doing. It has this aspect where you're fighting against your enemies, you're charging into the huts, you're eating their bodies, you're powering yourself up. It's a dark theme in theory, and it's a great miniature production, solid gameplay loop, and then a campaign arc where you're going through a campaign as you level up your tribes and characters and all this stuff. And again, the overall puzzle of Hate was good, but it's asked me to play it 6 games in a row. And this is something that we'll see a few CMON titles have done. A few CMON titles have gone on this arc of we had World of Smog, Rise of Moloch, we have Arcadia Quest, we have Hate. All of them ask you to play 6 games. A accessible campaign, but still a campaign. And maybe they even have one-shot modes. I think Hate might have a one-shot mode, but it's not the way the game is designed to be played and enjoyed, and it didn't give me the same feeling of how good it could be. And so for me, Hate is one that I think that there's definitely people who are going to enjoy Hate a lot and be a big fan of them, be a big fan of it. For me, it was a good game that wasn't worth committing to a campaign arc to do. Coming in at another 3.5 out of 5, we have Rivet Wars. This one has recently been taken over by Steamforged Games, but Rivet Wars is one that I had a lot of fun with. This is the one that I definitely have a nostalgic element to this. It's one I played with my daughter a lot. She and I would play this little skirmish game, and I mentioned I don't like skirmish games. It's a bit different when it's almost cartoon, cartoon World War II, rolling dice and trying to effectively dominate your opponent when your opponent is your 6-year-old daughter. She's not 6 anymore, but she was like when I first played it, maybe even 5, I don't know. She played it when she was young. But anyways, the game itself, what's it called, Rivet Wars, is just dice chucking skirmish goodness. All it is spawning units onto the board, moving them around, and then attacking each other as you try to control the battlefield. There are a variety of scenarios to it, but it's just light, good fun. It's not a great game. It's a game that I had for several years, and eventually as we stopped playing it, I got rid of it. It's not one I really played with anyone else. I played with my daughter specifically. The Steamforged one I am intrigued by because they have a solo campaign. They're updating it. It's one I expect to play through. I don't expect to hold on to it forever, unless they make some major changes to it. I think Rivet Wars is a game I enjoy, but not necessarily a game system I love, but it's a 3.5 out of 5. Coming in another 3.5 out of 5, and this one's going to ruffle some feathers, we have Rising Sun. A game that is very popular, but for me, never landed the same way Blood Rage did. Even Ankh I have higher, as evidenced by the fact that it's not talked about yet, and it wasn't in the list of games I didn't play. But Rising Sun is a game, when it first arrived, I played it like 2 or 3 times right away. And then I kind of played it every year for the next 3 years before eventually realizing it wasn't a game that was working for me or my group. It was a game that was good but not great. It has alliances and it has area control and it has giant monsters, but I get some of those things from Blood Rage already, and the overall game puzzle of Rising Sun I didn't find as enjoyable or as compelling. I think I'd rather play something like Cyclades if I want more of the map exploration, although again, the Rising Sun alliances aspect, intriguing. It never pulled me in the same way other area control games do. I think the production was beautiful, amazing production. My kids used to play that game all the time. There's almost a part of me that wants to get it back just to let them play with the miniatures, but I have some games, I still have Ankh. I planned on getting rid of Ankh once upon a time, but then my kids wanted it for the miniatures, so it's still here. But either way, Rising Sun is a good game. I tried hard to enjoy it. For whatever reason, it didn't pull me in as much. There were small aspects, small different things that I have a whole Rising Sun versus Blood Rage video. You can watch that if you want more nuanced thoughts. But even things as simple as the fact that I hated the fact that you could have this giant monster that would be taken hostage in the game. It was a weird mechanic to me that kind of took the fun out of having giant monsters. And so I just like Blood Rage more. Everything but Rising Sun was fine. I enjoyed it. I had fun with it. But every single time I played Rising Sun, I would rather have been playing Blood Rage or some other game. Coming in at a 3.5 out of 5, we have the original Massive Darkness. Not the new one, the original Massive Darkness, which was a good game, and I enjoyed it. But when I played it, I was like, I don't know if I keep this compared to Zombicide. Because it felt like it was a good system that was similar yet different to Zombicide, but the biggest issue with Massive Darkness 1 was the fact that almost everything came down to stat modifiers. Every degree of growth or attacking against the enemy, it all felt like stat modifiers. Roll 1 more die, roll 1 fewer die, add 1 to your die, remove 1 from your die. The game felt like it had a good set of bones to it, but almost like it lost a degree of charm that can be present in these games. There was less interesting stuff happening, but there was a dungeon crawling experience that was a fun little puzzle of managing the enemies, of knowing when to open a door, of knowing when to charge things forward. As you progressed through levels, as you leveled up, it did a lot of things well, things that Massive Darkness 2 Hellscape built upon. But the original Massive Darkness did feel like it lost some degree of charm. For me, it's a 3.5 out of 5, a game that I actually held on to, because I liked the system enough, and I'm still a fan of this type of game from CMON Games, that from CMON. And yeah, it was a good game, but definitely not a great game. I think on its own, it would have left, but because of Massive Darkness 2, it's still here. We have Dogs of War, coming in at a 3.5 out of 5. This is one that did rank more highly once upon a time, but then I had a few too many gameplays that didn't give me as good of an experience, and I lowered the rating for it. Dogs of War is interesting, very unique one from, from Paolo Mori, I think, from Paolo Mori. It's a game of managing, effectively, you're operating as mercenaries. You're operating as mercenaries, throwing your forces behind different sides of the game. You have different houses fighting each other, and you have to choose where to throw your power as you play through it. Which results in an interesting game of people trying to figure out where the tides are going to turn as they try to be on the winning side and get paid every single round for their services. As you try to enlist more troops, as you place your units on spawns to get certain rewards. There are elements of Blitzkrieg or Caesar or whatnot in Dogs of War, but Dogs of War had a very interesting mechanic as far as that team-based mercenary approach where you weren't really a color, but you could choose to support a color this round, but maybe go against that color next round. That had an interesting element. Even in the same round, if you had the right betrayal card, you can go ahead and switch sides in between a round. So lots of interesting card play, lots of interesting growth of the units. I've had a lot of fun with Dogs of War at times. I had a few too many games that did not deliver a great experience, but only delivered a good experience, that eventually got to a point where I realized I was hesitant to pull off the shelf, and it did leave my collection. But this is one that did manage to stick around. I'd say most of the ones we've talked about till now, there aren't ones that really had any degree of longevity in my collection, with Massive Darkness being a weird asterisk over there. But Dogs of War is one that isn't in my collection, but I did have a large degree of affinity towards it for several years. We have Zombicide Invader coming in at, our first 4 out of 5. And I do like Zombicide Invader. Zombicide Invader is going to be one of those that's the main casualty of it is the fact that there are other CMON titles that are better for me in that same vein. But I've never once lost a game of Zombicide Invader. But it still felt much more difficult than Zombicide 2nd Edition. Zombicide 2nd Edition never even felt like there was danger. Zombicide Invader at least felt like you had to play the game, but I still always won it. I tried more challenging options, I tried leveling things up, and I still always won Zombicide Invader. But past that, I liked it. I liked the variety of Xenos. I liked the variety of enemies. I liked the change in theme. I liked the creeping mold mechanic. I liked the almost every single thing about it. The art style, I prefer the general. I prefer the Rafael Guillotin, I think. Whatever the general artist of CMON games are. It's art by Edward Guillotin. I prefer his art in general in the Zombicide systems, but I like the overall Zombicide Invader for most things. But ultimately, the difficulty became an issue as more Zombicides came in. Zombicide Invader is one that I always kept with concerns for 2 years, maybe. I had it around for 2 years or so. They had some interesting elements. They had Focused Fire. They had some things they did well. The Focused Fire made things too easy. They had things they did well. And I kept it around for a while because of that. But eventually, at a certain point, I was like, you know what? I don't think that I'm going to pull it out and table it as more Zombicides came in, as we got Zombicide Undead Alive, as Marvel Zombies became a thing. As better Zombicides entered my collection, I realized Zombicide Invader was never going to stick around, because there's always one I had complaints about, but I enjoyed it enough that I kept it. Versus now we're at the point where even great Zombicides are leaving because I can only have so much Zombicide in my collection. After Zombicide Invader, we have the Other's 7 Sins. I really like the other 7 Sins. In fact, it's one of the few deleted videos that I have never been able to show you. By deleted, I don't mean delete, I mean like lost. I lost a few videos. Over the years, I've lost maybe 7 or 8 total videos where I just filmed it and the content disappeared, got wiped, something happened to it. And one of them was The Other 7 Sins. It's a play that's not that between The Other 7 Sins and Cthulhu Death May Die. It was a comparison video that I filmed, and then it was gone, and the problem is I lost the video after I got rid of the game, so I never bothered refilming it. But the problem with The Other 7 Sins, it's a really solid game. It's a 1 versus many experience. We have one person controlling all these demons. The other players are controlling the characters. They move from building to building. They try to take out the hordes. They utilize the actions of the buildings. There's a bit of a push your luck mechanic as you level up, as you choose to take on extra wounds and whatnot, to roll extra dice or whatnot. It's been a while, so again, in some of these games, some of my details are foggy. It's just been a long time. But I really liked the overall game experience, with one main problem. I would just never pick it to play because, like I said already, there are other better CMON titles out there. If I want the 1 versus many element, then I would pick something like the Rule of Smog, Rise of Moloch instead, or even Master of the Universe now, although that wasn't true at the time. So there are better 1 versus many games from CMON's own catalog. If I want the push your luck element of trying to take on more punishment so I can get stronger, Cthulhu Death May Die does that so much better. So The Other 7 Sins was a game that I played after playing other games from CMON that I preferred. Even though it came out earlier, I only played it later. And by the time I dove into it, I was like, you know what? I think it's a good game. And I think CMON has other better games in their catalog. And so for me, it was never a keeper. I got it, played it a few times, and then moved on from it because other games in their catalog do it better. We have Besiege, Sons of the Abyss. I gave this a 4 out of 5. The same way I talked about how a Bloodborne or a Rising Sun might be like, how could you be so low in those games? For Besiege, it's almost like, how could you be so high? But I really like Besiege, with the caveat that I always played it with house rules. When the game first arrived, there were issues with it. They added some, notes down the road as far as how to actually play our things. I always played with some house rules on Besiege, but I had a lot of fun with the system. And I think Besiege is a good, overall fun game. I think the sheer amount of dice rolling, of abilities, of getting more cards and all these things as you go through the game, of leveling up your castle as you try to survive this onslaught of enemy forces, as you try to clear a way for your runner to go ahead and seek help. It was an interesting puzzle of tower defense and just managing your characters. It was Zombicide, but instead of you exploring, you were defending. You were staying static while while the enemy forces tried to assault the castle. I've had a lot of fun with Besiege over the years. It was a good game that I really enjoyed, but for a long time I knew it was always at risk of, again, losing to other CMON titles that give you that feeling. I still think Besiege is different enough that it might be worth owning or worth trying for, but ultimately, there's too many great games that give you dice rolling and just fun, leveling up, powering up, and Besiege always had the small aspect that it did feel like at times it could be a bit punishing, or the way things would attack the castle. It didn't feel like you had the same agency to explore the dungeon or wander around as you might in Massive Darkness or in Zombicide, and so for me, Besiege did eventually leave the collection. We have Ankh, Gods of Egypt at a 4 out of 5. I like Ankh, Gods of Egypt. I believe I gave it a 4.5 originally, but it did get demoted to a 4 over time. I think that for me, Ankh feels a little bit more procedural. Despite the giant miniatures, despite the general gameplay arc of, giant punishing gods sweeping across the board, similar to Ankh, similar to Rising Sun, similar to Blood Rage, Ankh has a very clever action mechanism as far as the way you're resolving your actions and the timing of them to try to get these extra benefits and rewards, as well the way you're setting up the board to try to be in the right places, the way you're isolating elements of the board with these camels, creating your own little areas. It has a great overall system that feels very tactical. It doesn't feel as much like a CMON title. In fact, a game I often compare it to is it feels a little similar to Tigris and Euphrates, but Tigris and Euphrates feels like it has more control and is more interesting in that sense. Ankh is one that eventually I did try to get rid of, only because I was trying to purge games, because I always try to purge games, because there's always great games coming in, which means always great games have to go. But it is one that my son saved, so it's still here for right now. I still been meaning to play through the Power of the Gods, or whatever it is, the expansion. I've never done that. The Pharaoh's expansion, whatever the expansion they have is. But it has great miniatures, it has good gameplay. I think Ankh is a very, very solid game. I just think that there's too many area control games in my collection that don't get played nowadays. Anyways, area control I find it gets played less these days than it used to, and so it's just this limited game time. And so Ankh is a great game. It is still here, though, because of my son. We have Dune War for Arrakis, another 4 to 5 over here on the table. In fact, we've talked about none of these, actually. Dune is the first one. Dune War for Arrakis is a 4 to 5. It's one that I wonder if it'll grow. My main problem with Dune is it does fall into a similar spot, as I mentioned, with Hate versus Rum Bones, where if I want a 2-player, 2-hour-long game, I'm usually going to play something like Rum Bones, because I love Rum Bones. Again, we'll talk about Rum Bones soon, but I love Rum Bones. But Dune War for Arrakis is a very good, clever system that I've had the chance to play a few times and really enjoyed the intricate back and forth and tactical management of that system. I find I don't play longer 2-hour games a lot, though. That's the main issue I have with Dune. I find 2-player games at a half an hour, at 15 minutes, at 30 minutes, at 60 minutes, whatever. 2-hour-long competitive 2-player games is not the main thing I do. It's like competitive, specifically. 2-hour-long competitive 2-player games like Dune, like Rum Bones, they don't happen as often as I'd like, and so my main issue with Dune is just, will it stay? Because will it get played? But I like Dune. I think Roy Kennedy, for this, I would give it a 10 out of 10. In general, it's been getting a lot of praise. There's an upcoming crowdfunding campaign for the expansion and reprint and all that. Or I think pre-order, not campaign. But I really like the system. I think it's very clever. I do wonder if one side is stronger than the other, which is a different conversation for a different day. I wonder what the win rates on the game are like. But overall, Dune is rewarding and will give you a tactical puzzle. I do wonder if it'll be variable enough over time. Something like Rum Bones will always be a different game every time I play it. I wonder if Dune War for Arrakis will feel different every time I play it, or if it's going to feel like you're perfecting your game as opposed to being different. I don't like perfecting games. I like learning a system and then being forced to adapt to new criteria within that system. And again, if you ever play something like Rum Bones, we'll talk about it more later, but each character will change the game totally for you. So I do wonder about Dune. Right now it's here. I don't know if it's a game that's here forever. We have coming up next after Dune War for Arrakis, we have Cyberpunk 2077 Gangs of Night City. Another 4 out of 5. That's another one that I own. And so far, by the way, just so you're keeping track over here, from the ones we've talked about so far, I own Massive Darkness because it's a weird exception. I own Ankh, Gods of Egypt. I own Dune War for Arrakis. We're starting to drift into the ones that I own. The first half of the list, I don't own most of these, and even some of the other ones we come up on, I may not still own, but we'll see. Actually, I might own the rest. Cyberpunk 27 Gangs of Night City is a 4 out of 5 for me, and it's another one that I wonder if it'll stick around. It's one that I gave it a 4 out of 5 when I first played it. I have not played the final game of it yet, so the final, game, I've only ever played the prototype. My main issue with Cyberpunk is just that it is an area control game that I gave a 4 out of 5. And like I said already earlier in this video, I have so many area control games, and I don't play the ones I love enough, so will I play the 4 out of 5s? And I'd like to give Cyberpunk more time before I get rid of it. I did enjoy it. This is an issue of limited game time. People talk all the time about the fact that, with these games, you're talking about, $200, $300, sometimes $400 all-ins for these games. Is that good enough for a game that's really good, but not great? And in the case of Cyberpunk 2077, I could recommend a bunch of games that are 5 out of 5s. I can recommend Blood Rage and Inish and Cyclades and all these other games. Rurik Dawn of Kiev, DEI, Divided Empire. There's so many great, incredible games. And we have Cyberpunk 2077 coming in at a 4 out of 5, which is It's a good game. It's worker placement with area control, with leveling up your character, not really leveling up your character per se, but getting more cards and whatnot to help you out, getting your edge runners, trying to position yourself, leveling up your tribes and factions. There's all this expansion content for it. The game looks like a game that I would enjoy diving into more. But time. Time is the main complaint against Dune, against Cyberpunk. There are some of these games that are just a question of will I play them. Next up we have God of War, which I gave a 4 out of 5, tentatively. Tentatively because I have to play it more. I covered my thoughts on this and I should you back on the game, but God of War is a really solid game that I enjoyed a lot, and I do think I'll play through because it's solo or co-op friendly. Although, if I'm playing it solo, I do prefer two-handing it as properly controlling 2 characters as opposed to the solo mode they give. But I think that God of War, it felt like Cthulhu Death May Die, but with an easier degree of setting it up, an easier degree of managing or playing it, and yes, managing it, even including the tokens. People were worried about moving tokens around. But the main thing God of War had going forward, because it did feel like in many ways it felt like a worse Cthulhu Death May Die. It felt like it took elements from Cthulhu Death May Die that worked well for them, and the question is how well do those things work in terms of applying it to God of War. And for me, I think that a lot of elements of Cthulhu Death May Die feel like Cthulhu Death May Die does it better. But the area that God of War did nicely was the area of synergy and the way you're powering up your synergy over there. That was a nice little puzzle as far as getting more attack cards, getting more, your own primary attack cards you'll be able to play things on, adding more cards to your deck, being able to benefit from the synergy as you both have to deal damage to the various characters. That puzzle felt interesting. That puzzle felt rewarding in terms of playing God of War. So it's one that I still have hesitancies about. I have hesitancies about will it be a game that I continue to play, or is it a game I want to play each mission once? I have hesitancies about will the characters feel variable enough. I love the character variety in Cthulhu Death May Die, but for me, God of War is a 10 to 4 to 5. I don't think it goes lower than that. I think it could go higher than 4 to 5 when I play it more and dive into it. The problem is, even if it doesn't go lower than a 4 to 5, because there are other better games, if it doesn't get higher, that might be enough for it to not stick around. But for right now, it is one that I'm excited about and want to dive into it more. We have The Dead Keep. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5, and I thought it might even be a 5 out of 5, but more plays of it kind of put it a drop down for me. I like The Dead Keep a lot. It feels like they took a lot of things that have worked well for them within the Zombicide system, within the Massive Darkness system, and then kind of took the elements that just work best and combined it into its own separate third entity. So now we have Zombicide, we have Massive Darkness, and we have The Dead Keep, all borrowing similar DNA, but while being different games. The main problem I have with The Dead Keep is it also borrowed a drop from Cthulhu Death May Die in terms of the way you fight these bosses, and the bosses have stages, and then you kill the boss, and then you have to go to the next stage of that boss. And I thought the way they currently handle it didn't feel good enough. I think if they can borrow a bit more from Cthulhu Death May Die, or be interesting or different enough, then it could be a great game. It could be one of my favorite games in their systems. Right now, if somebody asked me Black Plague or Dead Keep, I'd probably say Black Plague, although of course there's availability and cost questions which factor into it. But just in general, Black Plague. I recommend Massive Darkness over the Dead Keep. Dead Keep is a really, really, really good game that I enjoyed a lot. But I think they need to clean up those final bosses so it feels a bit more dynamic and a bit more interesting, as opposed to the way it currently feels, which is a bit lame. The rest of the game is great. The rest of the game is excellent. The game is challenging. It's hard. It has all these things. The way you level up your characters and these amulets you get, or whatever they're called, it's very, very solid, very enjoyable gameplay. But they need to get those bosses right. They need to be able to make the bosses more interesting while maintaining the balance of the game, and I just don't know if that will or won't happen yet. So for right now, the Dead Keep is a 10 to 4.5 out of 5. I don't think it gets lower than that unless they manage to make the game worse. But the problem is, lower than that's not... It's too similar to Zombicide that if they don't make it better, I don't know if it would stick around. So that's always the question mark to deal with there. We have Project Elite. Project Elite is a 4.5 out of 5 as well. Another game I own over here. A bunch of these, again, I think I own everything from this point on. But Project Elite is another 4.5 out of 5. I really like what it's doing. It's a game that was originally put out by... Oh my gosh... blank on the name of the company. It's over here by Arcadia Games, and the second edition was put out by Arcadia and CMON. And Project Elite is a real-time dice rolling game that gives you real-time in stages. You're effectively rolling dice in stages and 2-minute little arcs as far as you rolling dice trying to move your characters forward. The problem is every time you roll the enemy symbol, the enemies are charging towards you. So you're managing these enemies who are slowly marching towards you, or quickly marching towards you, because the faster you roll dice, the faster you can get stuff done in the 2-minute arc you have. But if you're not careful about it, then the enemies are progressing too quickly. So you're trying to play this weird balance of just being on top of your dice rolling as accurate as possible, as good as possible, as you go through the experience, as you ultimately try to survive. It is a really well done, fast-paced madness of a game that is very, very satisfying to go through and feels different than other games they have. It's not when I table it often, but I have such a rush when I do table it. That's going to be Project Elite, a really solid game from CMON, 4.5 out of 5. We have Massive Darkness 2 Hellscape. Another 4.5 out of 5. Really enjoyed this one. My main complaint against Massive Darkness 2 was the difficulty did need modification. And there are modifications you can make to the difficulty, but I did feel that it's a game that, to its credit, I didn't necessarily notice it, which is one thing I say. To me, it's not about winning or losing. It's about, do I realize that the game is too easy? If I play the entire time and I feel like I have to work the whole time and I happen to win all the time, it doesn't bother me. But if it feels like the game is easy, it doesn't feel like a challenge. It's all about the feelings of the game, not even the reality of it in a weird way. To me, I played a bunch of games of Massive Darkness 2 before starting to realize that I never really felt like I was going to die. I was still engaging with the challenge. I was still going through this dungeon crawler with my asymmetric characters. They have these roles that are very different as you play through the game. So each character has their own little puzzle. Are you push your luck? Are you bag building? Are you putting these those spots on the board and moving these zones around to help power up your characters? Each one has their own minigame of how they play and how they operate and how you power and level them up. I've had a lot of fun with Massive Darkness 2. I think it's an excellent game. The main problem with it, the main demotion to a 4.5 out of 5, is that you have to kind of deal with difficulty adjustments and play around with those to make the game work well for you. And also, it's not really balanced well around player counts. Some player counts are going to be, and character counts I should say, some character counts are going to be easier or harder than others. So you have to be mindful, even as you apply difficulty modifications, it's not consistent as to where and how they have to be applied depending on the character count you're playing as. That aside, you're rolling tons of dice, you have interesting abilities, you have interesting stuff to develop and power up, the enemies get stronger, there's a campaign mode if you want that. Overall, a very satisfying, very solid experience. Massive Darkness 2 Hellscape, a great game. And now from here on in, we get to our 5 out of 5s. CMON has a lot of 5 out of 5s for me. They have a lot of games that I thoroughly enjoy. Starting off with Zombicide Undead or Alive, which I lied, this is the only one that's not in my collection. Zombicide Undead or Alive is a 5 out of 5 for me. I think it's an excellent game, and it's not one that I was looking forward to quite as much. When I first played it, I liked it, but I wasn't quite blown away yet. And when I eventually showed up and I started playing it more, the sheer difficulty of the experience made it such a rewarding, good time. Thematically, it's not my favorite Zombicide. I like other themes more, but the Wild West, it's fine. I'm okay with it. But the way the game is so challenging and so difficult that you have to really pick your rosters. The only reason it's not still here is because thematically it's not my favorite, and I do find that Deceased and Marvel Zombies do have that level of difficulty in some of the missions. If you go through the right missions, they have that level of difficulty. So I can get that level of difficulty, I can get that level of challenge. If you play Deceased on Nightmare mode, you are in for a treat. By treat, I don't necessarily mean treat, it depends what you like in games. But overall, Zombicide Undead or Alive is the only 5 out of 5 CMON title, I believe, that is not currently in my collection, and it's only not there because there are Zombicides that are higher up. There's only so much you can do. There's only so much Zombicide you can have. But I really like and recommend Zombicide Undead or Alive. Coming up from there, we have Master of the Universe Clash for Eternia. Another 5 out of 5 game for me that I do wonder if this one will get demoted. I do wonder. Not gone quite yet, but I wonder if it'll get demoted. And the theme is a big part of it. Because to me, we're going to compare them at some point, but World of Smog, Rise of Moloch, and Master of the Universe Clash for Eternia, they build on the same system. But the World of Smog is a theme I prefer and gameplay I prefer, with the problem that it requires you to play 6 games at a time. That's your gameplay arc. Versus Master of the Universe Clash for Eternia requires you to play a single game, which is more accessible, but I don't care at all about the theme of Master of the Universe, so I find myself less pulled in by it, even though I think it's easier to table. But that's a problem for a different day. But Master of the Universe Clash for Eternia gives you scenario-based gameplay with tons of powering up your characters as you go through it, but whichever side you're playing as, it adapts well to different player counts. I haven't played the solo co-op, so I can't comment on, how well that plays, but the head-to-head is a satisfying scenario-based experience where you're going to power up your characters as you have to deal with the two different sides and the person, managing their power and sucking in the power from the heroes or whatnot. And again, the reason it's hard to define is because both sides can be like the Master of Darkness or whatever they're called. Both sides can be the Overlord character. And so you're going to have this interesting, just tons of powers and abilities throughout the gameplay experience. It is a lot of fun to play through. It's a lot of fun to play through. But I'm just not pulled in by the theme. But it's still a 5 out of 5 for me. Coming in next, we have the World of Smog, Rise of Moloch. Another 5 out of 5, which I do rank higher than Master of the Universe, although I don't know if I'll play it as often. This is one of those games where I don't know if I'll ever play it again, but I also don't know if I'll ever get rid of it. And it's just hard to table a game that requires 6 campaigns to play through when I could just play Master of the Universe that is slightly worse as far as my theme or interest, but at least I can just play it and be done with, as opposed to having to sign up for 6 campaigns in a row. The way I play games is just hard to sign up for campaign games or legacy games, any of those, especially if I have something similar that's giving me a similar experience without that. But the World of Smog, Rise of Darkness is one of I would say this is my hidden gem of CMON's games. This is a game that many people love, but it's not as well known, it's not as easily accessible, it's not a game most people are going to play, but if you do, the sheer amount of theme in this game, the sheer amount of tactical maneuverability, you have to download the FAQ, by the way. The rulebook does have some questions, the FAQ clears those things up. This is a game that I wish, like if they come out with a second edition of this game, I would be all over it. I'd probably get rid of my first edition, finally. But if they polished the rulebook, if they made it more accessible, if they made this into a one-shot, honestly, CMON, if you do watch this video, my greatest personal request that you took would be that you take the Road to Smog, Rise of Moloch, and turn this into a one-shot game. That would be, I would love that. I would love that in this game experience. Or even just even a house rules to mimic a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth gameplay. I'll honestly probably come up with it yourself. But this, it's a really good game. I don't know if or when I'll play it, but it's a really, really, really solid game. Rum Bones is my next 5 out of 5. Rum Bones is so much fun. I love the gameplay of Rum Bones. It gives you a MOBA experience where you have tons of minions that you're slaughtering. There's little pirates marching across the ships, marching across the decks from ship to ship. You're just trying to slaughter them slowly but surely. But meanwhile, you have your heroes that are swinging across the decks, that are jumping across, utilizing the powers, killing minions to ping them down so they can level up their skills and power things up while slowly taking down the enemies. It is so much fun. It really feels like a MOBA in the sense that you have to be careful. You jump into a horde of enemy heroes, you'll be slaughtered. You have to ping away the minions until you can power up and then eventually take them on. It has lots of tactical maneuvering with a roster of heroes that's going to change the way you approach the game every single time. The faction cards you have, the approach you're trying to take down their master, their steering wheel, or who knows what. Rum Bones is to me the best MOBA game that's out there. Yes, I've played Guards of Atlantis. Yes, I've played Cloudspire. Yes, I've played Skytier. To me, Rum Bones is still my favorite MOBA game from all the MOBA games that have existed. I just find it to be so much fun. I don't table as much as I'd like because it's a 2-hour long head-to-head experience, but when I do play it, it is so much fun. I cannot recommend Rum Bones enough. It's just a good time. We have Blood Rage, another 5 out of 5. This one is actually several steps down. Once upon a time, this is my #1 game of all time for several years running. I've played it enough that it has gone down a bit. I still love it, but I have played it enough that the satisfaction, the thrill of playing it is not where it used to be. But Blood Rage is one of the better area control games out there. It has drafting, which I love drafting. The sheer drafting of trying to pick which cards you're going to utilize for your engine. The 3 rounds of play, the powerful monsters. If you have the digital expansion, whatever, the Blood Rage digital pack, whatever it is, that they have the full more set of stuff. You have even more variety baked into your experience. Although they do have tons of tribes that are not asymmetric at all, so I don't know why that's necessary. But either way, Blood Rage is a good area control game that I find not too punishing, very rewarding. You get most of your points in the 3rd round, so you can be behind in the first 2 rounds and still have an excellent time. Blood Rage is just a good area control game that was my #1 game for a long time, but I've played it 50 plus times, and at a certain point, some games will get demoted a bit if that joy of diving into it is not the same place where it was at play 1 as it is at play 50. And so it's still great. It's still a 5 out of 5. I still think very highly of it. That's going to be Blood Rage, another great game. Marvel United is another 5 out of 5 for me. And I know it's offensive to some people that's higher ranked, but Marvel United is a good time. And I've been very clear with the fact that it is a lighter game. If not for the theme, I don't know if I'd care nearly as much, but it is a good time that I've played this game so much and I continue to have fun with it. I can play with my kids, I can play with my friends, I can play it solo, and I enjoy it all those ways. And the sheer variety of content you have in the Marvel United universe, the Marvel United Season 1, 2, and 3, and now DC United, the sheer variety of different approaches, of sequential battles to go through, of mixing up different characters, it is so much fun. I have my complaints against it. I wish the heroes felt more different. I really do. Like, I hope that maybe DC United will be the point where they finally really tackle making the heroes feel different, although maybe that makes the game less accessible, I don't know. And they've iterated upon it from Season 1, Season 2, Season 3. They've iterated to make them feel like they have more identity between equipment, between starting hand cards. At the end of the day, the bosses are great. The bosses feel like a real different challenge every single time. But the heroes, I wish they felt more different, but then balancing it would be a nightmare as far as the game, so that's part of the reason why, I assume that's part of the reason why it would be so much more work to actually balance different feeling heroes. But I think it's a great game. It is so much fun, especially when you're playing through some of the arcs. Playing against the Sentinels is one of the best gaming experiences I've ever had in terms of the mastery of trying to fight against somebody who every time you do something, they're doing it back to you. And balancing how to bypass that while get ahead, such as a rewarding challenge. And then going through the multi-arcs, there's so much fun within the Marvel United system of games. I've had a lot of fun with this. You can check out a bunch of different playthroughs on the channel of the different playthrough arcs. I highly recommend Marvel United. I think it's a really good time, and yeah, it's just a really good time. It's a 5 out of 5 for me. Coming up next, we have Zombicide Black Plague, another 5 out of 5 for me. I think Zombicide Black Plague is still one of the best Zombicides out there. It gives me, to me, is the peak Zombicide. Although I have nostalgia, it was my first Zombicide too, so factor that in. But I think it is one of the best Zombicides, both in terms of zombie variety, in terms of the character variety, in terms of the overall gaming arc. It was difficult without being too difficult. It had variety without being a waste of time because it's too easy. To me, it's just one of the best Zombicides. The only thing I didn't love was the Necromancer. Necromancer I thought was like kind of a lame mechanic overall, but it did still work, and something they kind of persevered with in Dead Keep. I think they had something similar to the Necromancer. Was it? No, they had spawning points. Maybe it was a little different. They had the spawning point similarity, and they have it with Doctor Strange and Marvel Zombies. But overall, Zombicide Black Plague and Green Horde together with it, although I think I prefer Black Plague, you could just mix and match contents as you will. It's a very, very good Zombicide experience. It is still a Zombicide experience I recommend you pick up. I have not played White Death, so I don't know anything about that. Like, I know Green Horde and Black Plague, very compatible. Don't know much about White Death, even though it's technically another medieval Zombicide. But either way, Zombicide Black Plague, a 5 out of 5 game, a great time. You can check playthroughs on the channel, reviews, play this, not that. I have a lot of content around the game. That brings us to Marvel Zombies. Marvel Zombies, which I rank a drop higher than Black Plague. A drop higher. It's another 5 out of 5, but it's a drop higher. And to me, Marvel Zombies did a lot of things well, and iterated upon the Zombicide formula in a way that was very rewarding to go through. I, by the way, vastly prefer playing as the zombie heroes against... I vastly prefer playing as regular heroes against zombies as opposed to playing as zombie heroes against regular whatever, again, playing against shield agents. So I vastly prefer it that way. But overall, the theme I love. The changing, the whole aspect of the bystanders, really enjoyable. The aspect of gathering traits, I do miss searching to a degree, but I hear the whole point of, you're not going to have Iron Man wielding a gun or something like that. It feels different. But overall, the changes are very solid. The gameplay is very hard. The power management is very rewarding. I really enjoy playing through Marvel Zombies, and I'm excited to play through more of it. There's so much content in that universe. I told you how much I've dove into Marvel United, but Marvel Zombies, I haven't tried all the variety of expansions. I have not tried a ton of the stuff. There's even a head-to-head mode, which I have not tried. But overall, really a big fan of the Zombicide system, and Black Plague and Marvel Zombies are my favorites there. Which brings me to my favorite CMON title of all time. I don't know if that will ever change. I mean, I shouldn't say stuff like that, because next year they'll put out a game that I love. But I have a hard time seeing this game ever being overthrown. But we have Cthulhu Death May Die as my number one game, number one CMON game, and it's my number 2 game of all time in general, just my rankings across the board. I love Cthulhu Death May Die. It gives me a dungeon crawling feeling. It gives me powering up. It gives me ramping up to this epic conclusion where you're fighting against a boss that's getting stronger as you play through it. Your characters are powering up as you go through it. It's just a good time. I have hundreds of hours sunk into Cthulhu Death May Die, and it's one that I'm always happy to table and play. The only strike against it is it's a slightly decent amount of work to set up and table. I guess not compared to other things in the genre. I guess I don't know. It's not that bad. It's really not. But it's so much fun. I guess the other ding I'd have is that the main ding I'd have, like the ding that stopped it from being my number 1 game of all time in general, is when I think of my best games of Cthulhu Death May Die, this would be my number 1 game of all time. But there are scenarios that are good and not great. I've never had a bad game. I've never had a game of Cthulhu Death May Die that I was like, you know what, that wasn't fun. It's always been fun for me. The question is, was it really fun, or was it, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much fun I had? And Cthulhu Death May Die has that. It's just the way you will win, you will lose, you will struggle, you will try to stay ahead of the curve. The scenarios throw different curveballs at you as you try to power up your characters. Picking and choosing your roster will be required in some scenarios. It's just a good time as far as the sheer power key. This, by the way, this isn't CMON's highest ranked game. At least I don't think it is. Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't believe so. I think Blood Rage and Rising Sun are still higher. But it's one that has consistently risen on the BGG rankings. It started off like, whatever it was. And over the years, it's consistently gone higher and higher and higher. This is one that has that, almost that cult classic aspect where just the word of mouth eventually makes it so that it continuously grows higher and higher and higher in the rankings. I think it's currently coming out like number 60 of all time, and I think it will continue to grow, especially once the next season delivers and more people get their hands in it. I think it's a game that is just, it's a good game. It's a good game. It's a very, very, very good game. And that's what we have over here. These are my ranking of CMON titles over here. 33 different bundles or whatnot, 16 of which I own, 17 of which I don't, 12 of which I haven't played yet, or 13 with Metal Gear Solid I haven't played yet, and they will inevitably continue to come out with multiple games a year, and we'll have to see which ones last and which ones don't. To a certain extent, they are their own worst enemy. Even if you are a hardcore CMON fan, which I am, you just can't keep up with everything, and you start having to pick and choose. And at some points, you pick and choose based on getting it all and then picking what stays. At a certain point, though, you move to not even backing things because you just can't afford to back it all, which I've already moved to that point. I don't back all their campaigns anymore. I back the ones that seem to resonate with me, the ones that really seem to pull me in, but I no longer back them all because I just can't keep up. But they still put out great games that I have had a lot of fun with. If I measure up the hours I have with any single publisher, there's no question that CMON has the most hours of game time that I've sunk into them as a publisher in general. I wonder what's even close to that. Cephalofair is going to be up there between Gloomhaven, Frosthaven, Jaws of the Lion, but it's a lot of hours. A lot of hours into the CMON universe. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this ranking video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.